The dust hadn't settled from the stagecoach wheels when Sarah Sutton stumbled off the wooden step and vomited behind the depot building, her hands gripping her knees as waves of nausea rolled through her body like the Wyoming plains stretched endlessly beyond South Pass City's wooden storefronts. She had been hiding this secret for 3 months now, carrying shame and fear in equal measure, along with the child growing inside her belly, and the journey west had been her last desperate attempt to escape the whispers that would have destroyed what remained of her reputation back in Philadelphia. The September sun beat down mercilessly on the frontier town in 1876, and Sarah wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, straightening her travel-worn dress and adjusting the bonnet that had gone askew during her illness. She needed to find lodging quickly before anyone noticed her condition or her distress. The town sprawled before her in shades of brown and gray, weathered wood and packed earth, with mountains rising in the distance like silent sentinels guarding secrets she wished she could bury forever. A shadow fell across her path as she rounded the corner of the depot, and Sarah found herself face to face with a tall man whose broad shoulders blocked the afternoon light. He wore dusty chaps over worn denim, a leather vest over a shirt that might have been blue once, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed eyes the color of creek water in summer. A bandana hung loose around his neck, and his sun-darkened hands rested easily on his belt, fingers calloused from years of hard work. "You all right, miss?" His voice carried genuine concern rather than the judgment she had grown accustomed to expecting, and something in his tone made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I'm fine," Sarah lied, though her pale face and trembling hands surely told a different story. "Just travel sickness. The road was rough." The cowboy studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze, lifting her chin in defiance of the vulnerability she felt. He seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade, past the lies and the fear, straight to the desperate truth she carried like a burden too heavy to bear alone. "Name's Harrison Fletcher," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "I work the Foster Ranch just outside town, but I come in regular for supplies and such. You look like you could use some water and a place to sit down." "I need to find a boarding house," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm looking for work. I can sew, cook, clean, teach children their letters. I'm educated and capable." Harrison's eyes lingered on her face, taking in the fine bones and delicate features that spoke of a gentler upbringing than most women who ended up in Wyoming territory. "Mrs. Patterson runs a respectable boarding house on 2nd Street. She's fair and decent. I can walk you there if you'd like." Sarah hesitated, weighing pride against practicality, but another wave of dizziness decided for her. "Thank you. That would be kind." They walked through the dusty streets together, Harrison matching his stride to her slower pace, and Sarah became acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople who noted the stranger in their midst. South Pass City had seen better days, she realized, noticing the abandoned buildings and quiet storefronts that suggested the gold rush boom had faded, leaving behind only those stubborn or desperate enough to make a life in this harsh land. "Town's not what it was," Harrison said, following her gaze. "Gold played out mostly, but there's still ranching and some mining. Folks here are hard-working, and most are decent enough if you give them reason to be." "And if you don't give them reason?" Sarah asked, thinking of the scandal she had fled. "Then they can be harder than this ground in winter," Harrison admitted. "But that's true most anywhere, I reckon." Mrs. Patterson's boarding house proved to be a 2-story structure, with a wide porch and curtained windows that suggested feminine touches inside. The proprietress herself emerged when Harrison knocked, a woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled back severely, and sharp eyes that assessed Sarah in one comprehensive glance. "Harrison Fletcher, you bringing me another mouth to feed." Mrs. Patterson's tone was gruff but not unkind. "Lady needs a room, Mrs. Patterson. Just came in on the stage. She's looking for work, too." Mrs. Patterson's gaze sharpened further, taking in Sarah's quality dress despite its travel stains, her educated bearing, and the tension in her shoulders that spoke of secrets carried. "Can you pay?" "I have some money," Sarah said quickly. "Not much, but enough for a week or two while I find employment. I can work for my keep after that. I'm skilled with a needle, and I can read and write and cipher. Come inside, Mrs. Patterson said finally, stepping back from the doorway. "We'll talk terms. Thank you, Harrison. I'll see she's settled proper." Harrison touched his hat brim again, his eyes meeting Sarah's for a long moment that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Welcome to South Pass City, miss." "Sutton," Sarah supplied. "Sarah Sutton." "Miss Sutton, I hope you find what you're looking for here." He turned and walked away, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. And Sarah watched him go with a strange reluctance before following Mrs. Patterson inside. The boarding house proved clean and simply furnished, with 6 rooms for let and a communal dining area where residents took their meals. Mrs. Patterson showed Sarah to a small room on the 2nd floor with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. The price was steep but not unreasonable, and Sarah counted out coins from her dwindling purse with fingers that wanted to shake. "I'll need work soon," Sarah said quietly. "Is there anyone in town who might hire me?" Mrs. Patterson sat on the edge of the bed, her stern expression softening slightly. "Child, I've seen that look before. You're running from something, and you're scared. I won't pry into your business, but I will tell you, this town has no patience for lies. Be honest about what you can do and what you need, and folks might surprise you with their charity. Try to deceive them, and you'll find yourself on the next stage out with nowhere left to go." Sarah's throat tightened, and she blinked rapidly against the tears that threatened. "I'm a good person," she whispered. "I made a mistake, but I'm good." "Most of us are good people who've made mistakes," Mrs. Patterson said, standing. "The Millers might need help at the general store. Mrs. Chen could use someone at the laundry, though it's hard work. And the school teacher, Miss Abernathy, has been poorly lately. She might welcome an assistant." She paused at the door. "Get yourself cleaned up and rested. Tomorrow's soon enough to start worrying about tomorrow." Sarah unpacked her few belongings after Mrs. Patterson left, hanging her 2 spare dresses and arranging her hairbrush and the small daguerreotype of her parents on the washstand. Her father stared out from the image with stern disapproval, and Sarah turned it face down, unable to bear the weight of his imagined judgment. He had died 2 years ago, her mother 3 years before that, leaving Sarah alone in a world that judged women harshly for the very mistakes it encouraged men to make. Thomas had been handsome and charming, a clerk in her father's law office with smooth words and false promises. He had sworn he loved her, that they would marry, that one night of passion would bind them together forever. But when she had told him about the baby, his mask had slipped, revealing the coward beneath. He had already been engaged to the daughter of a wealthy merchant, he had confessed, and Sarah had been nothing more than an amusing diversion. He had offered her money to go away, to deal with the problem, and the cold calculation in his eyes had shattered whatever foolish dreams she had harbored. She had taken his money, but not for the purpose he intended. Instead, she had bought a ticket west, to a place where no one knew her history, where she might have a chance to build a life for herself and her child. The shame still burned, but beneath it grew a fierce determination to survive, to prove that one mistake did not define her worth or her future. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by dreams of disapproving faces and whispered accusations, but morning brought fresh resolve. Sarah dressed in her simplest gown, pinned her honey-colored hair back neatly, and descended to the dining room where Mrs. Patterson served a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits to the handful of boarders. "Miss Sutton, these are my other residents," Mrs. Patterson announced. "Mr. Hobbs works at the assay office. Mr. and Mrs. Chen run the laundry, and this is Caroline West, who does alterations for the dressmaker." Sarah exchanged polite greetings, acutely aware of the curious glances, particularly from Caroline, a woman near her own age with kind eyes and a friendly smile. The meal passed with small talk about weather and town gossip, and Sarah learned that a dance was planned for Saturday night, that the preacher's wife had just had twins, and that rustlers had been causing trouble for some of the outlying ranches. After breakfast, Sarah asked Mrs. Patterson for directions to the general store and set out into the morning sunshine, her bonnet shading her face from the already intense light. South Pass City revealed itself more fully in daylight, a town clinging to existence through sheer stubbornness, with false-fronted buildings lining the main street and smaller structures spreading outward like ripples in a pond. The general store stood on a corner, its windows displaying everything from tinned goods to hardware, fabric to firearms. A bell jangled when Sarah pushed through the door, and a round-faced man looked up from behind the counter where he was measuring out flour for a customer. "Be with you in just a moment, miss," he called cheerfully. Sarah browsed the shelves while she waited, running her fingers over bolts of calico and muslin, noting the prices that seemed high compared to Philadelphia, but probably reasonable for goods that had to be freighted across hundreds of miles of the prairie and mountain. The other customer left, and the shopkeeper approached with a welcoming smile. Isaac Miller, proprietor. "What can I help you find today?" "I'm Sarah Sutton. I just arrived yesterday and I'm looking for work. Mrs. Patterson mentioned you might need help in the store." Isaac's smile faded slightly, his expression becoming more thoughtful. "My wife usually helps me, but she's been feeling poorly lately. Could use someone who can keep accounts, serve customers, help with inventory. You have experience?" "I helped manage my father's household after my mother passed," Sarah said, which was true if incomplete. "I'm good with numbers, and I learn quickly. Where are you from?" "Philadelphia." Isaac's eyebrows rose. "Long way from home. What brings a city girl to South Pass City?" Sarah had prepared for this question, crafting a story close enough to truth to be believable. "My parents are both deceased, and I have no other family. I wanted a fresh start somewhere new, somewhere I could make my own way." "Brave of you," Isaac said, though his tone suggested he suspected there was more to the story. "I can offer you 6 days a week, 8 to 6, with Sunday off. $30 a month, plus you can take any foodstuffs you need at cost. That fair?" It was more than fair. It was generous. And Sarah felt relief flood through her so intensely she almost swayed. "Very fair. Thank you, Mr. Miller. When should I start?" "Tomorrow morning's fine. Come a bit early and I'll show you around, introduce you to my wife." Sarah left the store with employment secured and hope lifting some of the weight from her shoulders. She spent the rest of the day exploring the town, noting the locations of the church, the school, the saloon that she would avoid, and the various businesses that kept the community functioning. Several people nodded to her in passing, curiosity evident but tempered with frontier courtesy that respected privacy. She was walking back toward the boarding house when she saw Harrison Fletcher again, this time mounted on a sturdy bay horse and leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. He spotted her and reined in, touching his hat in greeting. "Miss Sutton, you getting settled all right?" "Yes, thank you. I found work at the general store. I start tomorrow." "That's good. Isaac's a fair man, and his wife Ruth is good people." Harrison shifted in his saddle, seeming to want to say something more, but hesitating. Finally he continued, "There's a dance Saturday night if you're interested. Whole town turns out. Good way to meet folks." "I'm not much for dancing," Sarah said, though the truth was she loved dancing and missed the social gatherings of her former life desperately. "Well, if you change your mind, I'd be happy to save you a dance or two." Harrison's creekwater eyes held warmth that made Sarah's heart skip unexpectedly. "Have a good evening, Miss Sutton." He rode on before she could respond, leaving Sarah standing in the dusty street with her hand pressed to her chest, where her heart beat too fast for comfort. She could not afford complications, could not risk anyone looking too closely at her circumstances, but something about Harrison Fletcher made her want things she had no right to want anymore. Work at the general store proved both exhausting and absorbing, filling Sarah's days with activity that left little time for brooding. Isaac was patient in teaching her his inventory system, and Ruth Miller, when she felt well enough to come to the store, proved warm and welcoming despite obvious curiosity about Sarah's background. The customers varied from friendly to gruff, but most treated her with basic courtesy, and Sarah found herself learning the rhythms of the small community. She saw Harrison several times over the next few days, brief encounters when he came to town for supplies or business. He always greeted her politely, sometimes stopping to exchange a few words about weather or town news. And Sarah found herself watching for his tall figure more than she should. There was something steady about him, something solid and trustworthy that called to the frightened, desperate part of her that had been running for so long. Saturday arrived with the town buzzing with excitement about the evening's dance. Caroline had invited Sarah that morning at breakfast, offering to loan her a dress more suitable for dancing than Sarah's plain day gowns, but Sarah had declined, insisting she was too tired from her first week of work to attend. The truth was more complicated, a tangle of desire and fear, of wanting to join the normal life of the community, while knowing she carried a secret that would condemn her if discovered. But as evening fell and Sarah heard music drifting from the community hall, saw people in their best clothes walking past the boarding house in laughing groups, loneliness overwhelmed her caution. She changed into her better dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, and arranged her hair in soft curls around her face. She looked pale but pretty in the mirror, and if her waist was slightly thicker than it had been, the full skirts disguised it well enough. The community hall blazed with lamplight and resounded with fiddle music when Sarah arrived, standing uncertainly in the doorway until Caroline spotted her and rushed over with a delighted cry. "You came. Oh, I'm so glad. Come meet everyone properly." Caroline pulled her into the crowded room, making introductions faster than Sarah could track names and faces, until finally they reached a group near the refreshment table where Harrison stood, talking with several other men. "Harrison, look who decided to join us," Caroline said brightly. Harrison turned, and something flickered in his eyes when he saw Sarah, something warm and appreciative that made her cheeks heat. "Miss Sutton, you look lovely. May I have this dance?" He offered his hand, and Sarah took it before her fear could stop her, letting him lead her onto the floor where couples were forming up for a reel. His hand was warm and calloused against hers, his other hand settling respectfully on her waist. And when the music started, they moved together with surprising ease. "You said you weren't much for dancing?" Harrison said, a hint of amusement in his voice as Sarah followed the steps perfectly. "I said I wasn't much for it," Sarah replied, allowing herself a small smile. "I didn't say I couldn't do it. City education? My mother believed in proper accomplishments for young ladies." They spun through the dance, and Sarah felt something inside her loosening, some tight knot of tension unraveling as she let herself simply enjoy the moment. Harrison was a good dancer, confident without being showy, and he smiled down at her with genuine pleasure that made her breath catch. When the reel ended, Harrison kept her hand in his. "Walk outside with me? It's warm in here." Sarah knew she should refuse, should maintain proper distance, but she found herself nodding and following him through the crowd to the door. The night air was cool and sweet after the stuffy hall, stars blazing overhead in the clear mountain sky. They walked a little way from the building, the music fading to a pleasant background. "I'm glad you came tonight," Harrison said. "You seem like you've been carrying the weight of the world on those shoulders." "Is it that obvious?" Sarah tried to keep her tone light. "To someone who's looking, maybe." Harrison leaned against a fence post, studying her in the starlight. "I don't mean to pry, but I get the sense you're running from something, or someone." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "What makes you say that?" "The way you look over your shoulder sometimes. The way you flinch when folks ask questions. The sadness in your eyes, even when you're smiling." Harrison's voice was gentle. "I know that look, because I've worn it myself." "What were you running from?" Sarah asked, partly to deflect attention from herself, partly out of genuine curiosity. "The war, mostly. The things I saw, the things I did. I came west after Appomattox because I couldn't stay in Tennessee with all those ghosts." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Took me a long time to realize you can't outrun your past. You can only make peace with it and build something better going forward." "And have you made peace with it?" "Getting there. Some days are easier than others." He looked at her directly. "Whatever you're running from, Sarah, it might catch up with you eventually, but you don't have to face it alone." The kindness in his words, the offer of support from someone who barely knew her, broke something open inside Sarah. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them, and she turned away, ashamed of her weakness. But Harrison's hands were gentle on her shoulders, turning her back to face him. "Hey now, I didn't mean to upset you." "You didn't," Sarah managed through her tears. "You're just being kind, and I'm not used to kindness anymore." Harrison pulled a bandana from his pocket and handed it to her, waiting patiently while she wiped her eyes and struggled for composure. When she finally looked up at him, his expression held such concern and care that fresh tears threatened. "I should go back inside," Sarah said. "People will talk if we're out here too long." "Let them talk, but if you want to go back, I'll walk you." They returned to the hall, and Sarah danced a few more dances with other partners, aware of Harrison's gaze following her around the room. When the evening ended and people began drifting home, Harrison appeared at her side to walk her back to the boarding house, a courtesy Sarah accepted with gratitude and guilt in equal measure. "Thank you for tonight," Sarah said when they reached Mrs. Patterson's porch. "It was nice to feel normal for a while." "You are normal," Harrison said firmly. "Whatever you think is wrong, whatever mistake you think you made, you're still just a person deserving of respect and kindness, and maybe a chance at happiness. You don't know what I've done. Don't need to. I can see who you are now, and that's enough for me." Harrison tipped his hat. "Good night, Sarah. I'll see you soon." He walked away into the darkness, and Sarah watched until she could no longer see him, then climbed slowly to her room, where she lay awake for hours thinking about kindness and second chances, and the impossible possibility that she might find both in this harsh and beautiful land. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm of work and gradual acceptance into the community. Sarah proved herself capable at the store, earning Isaac's trust and Ruth's friendship. She attended church on Sundays, sitting in the back pew and listening to the preacher's words about redemption and forgiveness with a hungry heart. She took her meals at the boarding house and spent her evenings sewing or reading, living a quiet life that would have seemed unbearably dull in Philadelphia, but felt almost peaceful here. Harrison became a regular presence in her life, stopping by the store more often than strictly necessary, walking her home from church, appearing at her side during community gatherings, with an ease that suggested he had every right to be there. Sarah knew she should discourage his attention, should protect both of them from the inevitable pain when her secret was revealed. But she was lonely and frightened, and he made her feel safe in ways she had forgotten were possible. October arrived with cooler temperatures and golden aspens turning the mountainsides to flame. Sarah's condition was becoming harder to hide, her dresses growing tighter despite the loose cuts she had carefully chosen. She had perhaps another month before her pregnancy would be obvious to anyone paying attention, and Ruth Miller had already started giving her speculative looks that suggested suspicion. It was a Tuesday afternoon, quiet in the store with no customers, when Ruth finally broached the subject. She was helping Sarah rearrange some fabric bolts, and she said casually, "My sister had that same green look you get sometimes. She was carrying her first child." Sarah's hands stilled on the calico she was folding. "Mrs. Miller, I'm not judging, child." Ruth's voice was kind. "But if you're in the family way, you need to be thinking about what comes next. Winter's coming, and South Pass City in winter is no place for a woman alone with a newborn." Sarah's throat closed with panic and shame. "I didn't mean to deceive anyone. I just needed work, needed a chance to get on my feet before folks figured it out and ran you out of town," Ruth finished gently. "Sarah, I like you. You're a good worker and a sweet girl, but you're right that some people won't be kind when they realize the truth. You need a plan." "I know." Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I just don't know what it is yet." Ruth was silent for a moment, then said carefully, "The baby's father, is he coming for you?" "No, he made it clear he wants nothing to do with me or the child." "Then you need to think about whether you want to try to raise this baby alone, which will be hard, or whether you might consider finding a family to take the child, or—" Ruth hesitated. "Or whether you might consider marriage." "Who would marry me in this condition?" Sarah asked bitterly. "Everyone will know it's not his child. Some men don't care about that if they care about the woman." Ruth gave her a significant look. "Harrison Fletcher has been dancing attendance on you for weeks now. A blind man could see he's smitten." Sarah's heart clenched. "I couldn't. It wouldn't be fair to him. Might let him decide what's fair." Ruth patted her hand. "Just think about it. You have a little time yet, but not much." That evening, Sarah sat in her room staring out at the darkening street, Ruth's words echoing in her mind. She had grown to care for Harrison over these past weeks, had come to look forward to his visits and treasure their conversations, but the thought of trapping him in marriage to provide legitimacy for another man's child made her stomach turn. He deserved better than that. Deserved a wife who came to him freely and honestly, not one driven by desperation and shame. But what were her alternatives? She had saved a little money from her wages, but not enough to survive the winter without work, and no one would employ her once her pregnancy became obvious. The thought of being turned out, of trying to give birth alone in some freezing shack, terrified her. And the thought of giving up her baby, of handing over the child she had already grown to love, despite the circumstances of conception, broke her heart. She was still wrestling with impossible choices when Caroline knocked on her door that Saturday morning with an invitation to join a group of women making preserves at the preacher's house. Sarah almost declined, then realized that isolation would only make her situation worse. She needed friends, needed connections in this community that might offer support when her shame was revealed. The preacher's house proved warm and welcoming, filled with the sweet smell of cooking fruit and the chatter of women working together. Sarah found herself peeling apples alongside Caroline and several other young women, listening to their gossip and jokes with a strange mix of envy and affection. This was the life she might have had, the normal progression of courtship and marriage and children born within the respectable bounds of matrimony. "Harrison Fletcher was asking about you yesterday," one of the women, Anna, said with a mischievous smile. "Wanted to know if you were stepping out with anyone." "We're just friends," Sarah protested, feeling her cheeks heat. "That man doesn't look at you like a friend," another woman laughed. "He looks at you like you're water in the desert." "Leave her be," Caroline said, but she was smiling too. "Though I will say Harrison is one of the good ones, steady, hard-working, honest. Any woman would be lucky to catch his eye." Sarah focused on her apple peeling, not trusting herself to respond. The women's teasing was good-natured, but it made her painfully aware of the gulf between their assumptions and her reality. They saw a courtship, a potential love story, while she knew it was a foundation built on secrets that would crumble once the truth emerged. They were packing the finished preserves into jars when a commotion outside drew everyone to the windows. A group of riders was coming into town fast, and even from a distance Sarah could see something was wrong. One of the men was slumped in his saddle, and when they pulled up in front of the doctor's office, several men rushed to help him down. "That's Charlie Webster from the Foster Ranch," someone said. "Looks like he's hurt bad." The women rushed outside, preservation forgotten in the face of crisis, and Sarah followed to find a crowd gathering around the injured man. Blood soaked his shirt, and his face was gray with pain and shock. The doctor emerged from his office and began barking orders, and several men carried Charlie inside, while others began explaining what had happened. "Rustlers hit the ranch this morning," one of the riders said grimly. "Tried to run off a whole herd. Charlie got shot trying to stop them, and Harrison Fletcher took off after them alone like a damn fool." Sarah's blood went cold. Harrison went after rustlers by himself? Didn't give us a choice. He was gone before we could stop him, tracking them into the mountains. The rider shook his head. "Could be he catches up to them. Could be he doesn't come back at all." The next hours passed in agonizing slowness. Charlie Webster survived his surgery, but was gravely wounded, the bullet having passed dangerously close to vital organs. The men from Foster Ranch waited in town, debating whether to form a posse to go after Harrison, but the trail had already gone cold and darkness was falling fast. Sarah found herself unable to eat or rest, pacing her room and staring out into the night, imagining Harrison alone in the wilderness facing dangerous men. She finally understood, with painful clarity, that she had fallen in love with Harrison Fletcher. Not the desperate, feverish passion she had mistaken for love with Thomas, but something deeper and more solid, built on respect and kindness and the steady way he made her feel valued and protected. The thought of losing him, of never seeing his quiet smile or hearing his gentle voice again, was unbearable. Morning brought no news, and Sarah went to work at the store, moving through her tasks mechanically, while dread gnawed at her stomach. Isaac tried to distract her with conversation, but his own worry for Harrison was evident, and by midday the whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for word. It came just after 2 o'clock when a shout went up from the street. Sarah rushed to the window to see Harrison riding down the main street, dusty and exhausted, but alive and whole. Behind him, tied to their horses and looking significantly worse for wear, were 3 men who could only be the rustlers. The stolen cattle followed in a loose herd, driven by several other riders Sarah recognized from the Foster Ranch. Relief so intense it was almost painful flooded through Sarah, and before she could think better of it, she was out the door and running toward Harrison, propriety and reputation forgotten in the overwhelming need to see for herself that he was unharmed. He was dismounting in front of the sheriff's office when she reached him, and he turned at the sound of her footsteps with surprise that quickly transformed into something warmer. "Sarah." "You idiot," Sarah said, breathless and furious and terrified all at once. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." Harrison handed the rustlers over to the sheriff and his deputy, then turned his full attention to Sarah. "You were worried about me?" "Of course I was worried. Everyone was worried. You went after 3 armed men alone. Had to be done. They shot Charlie, and they were stealing cattle that represent a whole year's work for folks who can't afford to lose them." Harrison's eyes searched her face. "But I'm touched that you cared." "Of course I care," Sarah said, and then stopped, realizing what she had admitted in front of half the town, who were gathering to hear the story and gawk at the captured rustlers. Harrison's expression shifted into something intent and focused, despite his obvious exhaustion. "Sarah, can we talk? Somewhere private?" She nodded, not trusting her voice, and followed him away from the crowd to the relative privacy of the alley beside the store. He leaned against the wall, weariness evident in every line of his body, but his eyes never left her face. "I need to tell you something," Harrison said. "These past weeks getting to know you, they've meant more to me than I can properly express. You're smart and brave and kind, and when you smile, it's like the sun coming out. I know I'm just a cowboy without much to offer, but I'd like the chance to court you proper, if you'd allow it." Sarah's heart broke and soared simultaneously. "Harrison, I can't. There's something you don't know about me." "Then tell me." She took a shaking breath, knowing this moment would end whatever fragile thing had grown between them, but unable to keep lying to the one person who had shown her genuine care. "I'm pregnant. That's why I came west, why I was running. The father wanted nothing to do with me or the child, and I was ruined back home. I came here hoping I could hide it long enough to figure out what to do, but I'm running out of time." Harrison was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. She had known this would be his reaction, had known no decent man would want her once he learned the truth, but the pain of losing him still cut deeper than she had expected. "How far along are you?" Harrison asked finally. "About 4 months. I won't be able to hide it much longer." "And the father? He's truly not coming for you? There's no chance of him changing his mind?" "None. He made that brutally clear." Bitterness crept into Sarah's voice. "I was nothing to him but a mistake he wanted erased." Harrison pushed away from the wall, his jaw tight with anger that Sarah thought was directed at her, until he spoke. "Then he's a fool and a coward who doesn't deserve you, or the child you're carrying. But that's his loss and my gain if you'll have me." Sarah stared at him in confusion. "I don't understand." "I'm saying marry me, Sarah." Harrison took her hands in his grip warm and sure. "Not because you need rescuing, though you do. Not because you need a name for your baby, though that's true too. But because I want you. Because these weeks knowing you have been the best weeks I've had since I came to Wyoming. Because I think we could build something good together if you'd give us the chance." "You can't mean this," Sarah whispered. "You'd be taking on another man's child, dealing with all the gossip and judgment. I can mean it, and I do. Marry me, Sarah. Let me give your baby my name, and you my protection, and both of you my heart, for whatever that's worth." Harrison's eyes held hers with an intensity that made her tremble. "You're wanted, not needed. I'm not doing this out of pity or duty, but because I've fallen in love with you, and I don't want to face another day without knowing you're mine." Sarah couldn't speak past the tears clogging her throat, couldn't process that this was really happening, that this good man was offering her everything she had lost hope of having. She searched his face for any sign of doubt or resentment, and found only sincerity and the beginnings of a love that matched her own. "Are you sure?" she finally managed. "Are you absolutely certain? Because once we do this, there's no going back." "I've never been more certain of anything." Harrison raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Say yes, Sarah, please." "Yes," Sarah breathed. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll marry you and spend the rest of my life being grateful for your kindness and trying to be worthy of it." "You're already worthy." Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her close while she cried against his chest. Years of fear and shame and loneliness pouring out in great shaking sobs that he weathered with patient strength. "It's all right now. You're not alone anymore. We'll face whatever comes together." When Sarah finally raised her head, scrubbing at her tear-stained face, she found several townspeople watching from the street, with expressions ranging from curious to knowing. The news would be all over town by evening, and Sarah knew some would count months when the baby was born and draw their own conclusions. But with Harrison's arm around her shoulders and his heart offered freely, she found she could face that judgment with her head held high. They went to see the preacher that very afternoon, explaining their desire to marry quickly. Reverend Thompson, a kindly man in his 60s who had seen enough of human nature not to judge harshly, agreed to perform the ceremony the Saturday, giving them 4 days to prepare for a wedding that would change both their lives irrevocably. Ruth Miller cried when she heard the news and immediately began planning what would serve as a wedding feast, enlisting the help of the other women who were charmed by the romance of it, even if some suspected the practical reasons behind the haste. Caroline offered to alter one of her own dresses for Sarah to wear, something prettier than the plain gowns that were all Sarah possessed. Even Mrs. Patterson softened, offering to host a small celebration at the boarding house after the ceremony. Harrison spent those 4 days securing permission from his employer to build a cabin on ranch land, a common arrangement that would give them a home of their own while keeping him close to his work. Several men from town offered to help with the construction, and by Friday, a small but sturdy cabin was taking shape about 2 miles from the main ranch house, set in a pretty spot with a creek nearby and views of the mountains. Sarah moved through the preparations in a daze of disbelief and cautious hope, half expecting Harrison to change his mind, to realize what he was taking on and withdraw his offer. But he appeared at the store each day, sometimes just to smile at her and touch her hand briefly. And each time his eyes held the same steady determination and growing affection that made her believe this might actually be real. Saturday arrived bright and cold, the first real hint of the winter to come, and Sarah dressed in Caroline's altered gown, a soft green that brought out her eyes and disguised her thickening waist. Caroline and Ruth helped her arrange her hair, weaving through it a few late wildflowers that Harrison had brought that morning. And when Sarah looked in the mirror, she saw a bride, not a ruined woman, looking back. The church was packed when she arrived. It seemed the whole town had turned out to witness the wedding of the city girl and the cowboy, and Sarah felt her courage wavering until she saw Harrison waiting at the altar. He wore clean clothes and a new shirt, his hair neatly combed, his face lit with such joy at the sight of her that Sarah's doubts melted away. This was real. This was happening. This man was choosing her, freely and fully, knowing her worst secret and loving her anyway. She walked down the aisle alone, having no one to give her away, but Harrison met her halfway, offering his arm and walking with her the rest of the way, as though to say they were equals in this, partners choosing each other. The ceremony was simple, the traditional words taking on profound meaning as Sarah promised to love and honor this man who was saving her life in every way that mattered, and Harrison promised the same with a voice that rang clear and sure through the small church. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them married and told Harrison he could kiss his bride, Harrison cupped Sarah's face in his calloused hands with such tenderness that fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. His kiss was gentle and sweet, a promise of patience and care, and when he pulled back, his eyes held wonder that she felt mirrored in her own heart. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said softly, trying out the name. "Mr. Fletcher," Sarah replied, and they smiled at each other like children sharing a secret as the congregation erupted in applause around them. The celebration at the boarding house was modest but heartfelt, with food and music and people offering their congratulations with varying degrees of sincerity. Sarah noticed some of the older women counting on their fingers and exchanging knowing glances, but she held her head high and kept her hand in Harrison's, drawing strength from his unshakable presence at her side. As the afternoon waned, Harrison leaned close and murmured, "Ready to see your new home?" Sarah nodded, suddenly nervous about the wedding night that awaited, about the intimate reality of sharing her life with this man she had married. They took their leave amid a shower of rice and well-wishes, Harrison helping her up onto a wagon loaded with their few possessions and the gifts people had pressed upon them, quilts and dishes and practical necessities for starting a household. The drive to the cabin took half an hour, following a rough track through increasingly wild country. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, and despite her nervousness, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This harsh, beautiful land had given her back what civilization had stolen, and she would spend the rest of her life being grateful for that gift. The cabin proved small but well built. One room with a stone fireplace, a loft for sleeping, and windows that let in the fading light. Someone, probably Ruth, had already stocked basic supplies, and a fire crackled on the hearth. Harrison carried Sarah over the threshold, another promise in the gesture, and set her down gently in the center of their new home. "It's not much," he said, suddenly uncertain, "but I'll add on as we need more room. I'll make it comfortable for you and the baby, I promise." "It's perfect," Sarah said, and meant it. "Harrison, I need you to understand something. You don't owe me anything. You've already given me more than I had any right to hope for. If you want to wait, to take time before this becomes a real marriage in every way, I'll understand." Harrison was quiet for a moment, then moved to stand before her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Sarah, I married you because I want a real marriage with you. All of it. The partnership and the friendship, and yes, the physical side of things too. But only when you're ready, when you want me the same way I want you. There's no rush. We have the rest of our lives." Relief and something warmer flooded through Sarah. "I want you," she said softly. "I'm afraid, because the last time I was with a man, it ended so badly. But I trust you in a way I never trusted him. I want to be your wife in every sense." Harrison's eyes darkened with desire, tempered by tenderness. "Then we'll take it slow and careful, and if you need to stop at any point, you just say so. This is about us, about building something good together. No shame, no fear, just two people who care about each other." He kissed her then, deeper than the chaste kiss in the church, and Sarah responded with a passion she had thought lost forever. Harrison was patient and gentle, treating her like something precious, and when they finally came together in the bed he had built with his own hands, it was nothing like her experience with Thomas. This was communion, not conquest. Two souls reaching for connection. And when Sarah cried afterward, it was from joy and relief, and the beginning of a healing she had not known was possible. They lay tangled together in the darkness afterward, Harrison's hand resting protectively on her belly where the baby rested, and Sarah felt peace settle over her like a benediction. She had been so afraid for so long, had thought herself ruined beyond redemption, but here in this rough cabin in the wilderness, she had found grace in the form of a cowboy who saw her worth when she had forgotten it herself. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, "for choosing me, for loving me, for giving my baby your name and your protection." "Our baby," Harrison corrected gently. "From this day forward, this child is mine as much as yours. I'll love them and raise them as my own, and no one will ever make them feel less than wanted and cherished." Sarah turned in his arms to kiss him again, pouring into the kiss all the love and gratitude and hope that filled her heart. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and she knew there would be many, they would face them together. She was no longer alone, no longer running, no longer afraid. She was Sarah Fletcher, wife of Harrison Fletcher, and she was home. The winter that followed proved hard, but not unbearable. Harrison worked long hours at the Foster Ranch, often leaving before dawn and returning after dark, but he always came home to Sarah with stories of his day and questions about hers. Sarah made their cabin into a home, sewing curtains and braiding rugs, learning to cook on the temperamental stove and manage the endless tasks of frontier housekeeping. Her pregnancy progressed, her belly swelling obvious beneath her loosened dresses, and if some people in town did the mathematics and drew conclusions, most kept their opinions to themselves. Harrison's fierce protectiveness and the respect he commanded among the other ranchers went a long way toward silencing potential gossips, and Sarah found herself gradually accepted into the community as Harrison's wife rather than pitied or judged as an unwed mother. Ruth Miller became a good friend, visiting often and bringing Sarah hand-me-down baby clothes and advice about childbirth that was both terrifying and reassuring. Caroline continued her friendship as well, and Sarah slowly built a circle of women who would support her through the ordeal ahead. Harrison proved endlessly patient with her mood swings and fears, holding her when nightmares about the birth plagued her sleep, rubbing her aching back without complaint, talking to the baby through her belly in a low voice that never failed to make Sarah smile. He was building furniture in his spare time, a cradle and a chest for baby clothes, whistling while he worked with an contentment that told Sarah he harbored no regrets about their hasty marriage. "Do you ever wish you had married someone else?" Sarah asked one evening in late December as they sat by the fire, her feet propped on his lap while he rubbed them. "Someone who came to you without complications?" Harrison looked at her seriously. "I wish you hadn't been hurt the way you were. I wish that man had been decent enough to stand by you. I wish you hadn't had to be so afraid for so long. But I don't wish I had married someone else, because then I wouldn't have you, and you're what I want. Even though I'm huge and uncomfortable and cry at everything, especially then." Harrison's smile was tender. "You're carrying our child, Sarah. Every day you're growing more beautiful to me, and every day I'm more grateful you said yes when I asked you to marry me. I couldn't have said anything else." Sarah reached out to touch his face, running her fingers through his beard that he had let grow for winter warmth. "You saved my life, Harrison. In every way a person can be saved." "You saved mine too," Harrison said quietly. "I was just going through the motions before you came, working and eating and sleeping, but not really living. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to build something lasting, instead of just drifting. We saved each other." Christmas came with a fierce snowstorm that kept them snowed in for 3 days, but Sarah found she did not mind being trapped in their small cabin with Harrison. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, played cards and made plans for the future. Harrison wanted to eventually buy his own land, build a larger house, run his own cattle. Sarah wanted to maybe start a small school someday, teaching the scattered ranch children their letters. They wove their dreams together, creating a shared vision of the life they would build. January brought bitter cold and Sarah's increasing discomfort as the baby grew heavy and restless inside her. The doctor came out from town to check on her in mid-month, pronouncing her healthy and the baby positioned well, predicting a birth sometime in late February or early March. Sarah tried not to think too much about the ordeal ahead, but fear crept in during the long, dark hours of winter nights. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked Harrison one night, gripping his hand tightly. "What if I die, or the baby dies, or both of us?" "You're not going to die." Harrison's voice was firm, with a certainty he probably did not feel. "You're strong and healthy, and the doctor said everything looks good, but if you're scared, I'll stay with you through the whole thing. I won't leave you alone for a second. Men don't usually attend births. I'm not usual men, and this is our baby. I want to be there, want to help however I can." His steady presence calmed Sarah's fears, and she relaxed against him, letting his warmth and strength surround her. Whatever came, they would face it together, and that made all the difference. February arrived with slightly warmer temperatures but more snow, and Sarah grew increasingly impatient with her unwieldy body and the waiting. The baby was very active now, kicking and rolling in ways that were sometimes uncomfortable but always reassuring. Harrison would rest his hand on her belly in the evenings, marveling at each movement, talking to the child about the world they would soon enter. "Going to teach you to ride," he told her stomach, "and rope cattle and track in the snow. Whether you're a boy or girl doesn't matter. You're going to know how to handle yourself in this country." "Maybe they'll want to read books and study," Sarah suggested with amusement. "Then you'll teach them that, and I'll teach them the other. They'll be educated and capable and loved more than any child has ever been loved." Sarah's labor started on a cold Tuesday morning in late February. Beginning with a backache she tried to ignore until her water broke in a rush that sent Harrison into a controlled panic. He rode to fetch Ruth Miller and the doctor while Sarah paced the cabin, breathing through contractions that grew steadily stronger and closer together. Ruth arrived first, taking charge with the calm efficiency of a woman who had birthed 6 children of her own and attended dozens more deliveries. She got Sarah into her nightgown and into the bed, talking soothingly about how well Sarah was doing and how soon she would meet her baby. The doctor arrived an hour later, examining Sarah quickly and announcing that everything was progressing normally. Harrison stayed by Sarah's side through the entire ordeal, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement when she was certain she could not endure another moment. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the afternoon and into the evening, and Sarah screamed and cursed and cried, but Harrison never flinched, never left, never stopped telling her she was brave and strong and doing perfectly. Finally, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Sarah felt the overwhelming urge to push. The doctor encouraged her, Ruth supported her shoulders, and Harrison held her hands so tightly she thought bones might break, and after an eternity of effort, Sarah heard the most beautiful sound in the world as her baby drew its first breath and wailed in protest at this strange new existence. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, holding up a squalling, red-faced infant. "A big, healthy boy." Ruth cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Sarah's arms, and Sarah stared down at the tiny face in wonder and overwhelming love. He had a shock of dark hair and unfocused blue eyes and tiny, perfect fingers that wrapped around Sarah's thumb with surprising strength. "He's beautiful," Sarah breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Harrison, look at him. He's perfect." Harrison leaned over her shoulder, his own eyes wet as he studied the baby, with an expression of fierce protectiveness and instant devotion. "He's ours," Harrison said softly. "Our son. Hello, little one. Welcome to the world." The baby quieted at the sound of Harrison's voice, seeming to recognize the father who had spoken to him through Sarah's belly for months. And something in Sarah's heart settled and healed completely in that moment. This was her family. This was her future. This was the redemption she had stopped believing was possible. "What should we name him?" Sarah asked, after Ruth and the doctor had finished their work and left them alone with their new son. Harrison was quiet for a moment, his finger stroking the baby's soft cheek. "I was thinking Henry Fletcher. It was my father's name, and he was a good man. Died when I was young, but I remember him being kind and steady. Seems like a good name for this little fellow." Henry Fletcher. Sarah tried it out, finding it strong and solid and perfect. "I love it. Henry, your name for your grandfather, and you're going to grow up knowing you're wanted and loved and valued. Your father made that promise, and he's a man who keeps his word." They spent the evening marveling over every tiny detail of their son, counting fingers and toes, laughing at his expressions, arguing playfully over who he resembled. Sarah thought he looked like Harrison around the eyes, but Harrison insisted he had Sarah's nose and chin. The truth was, Henry looked like himself, a new person entering the world with his own identity to forge. But Sarah did not mind the debate. It was another way of claiming this child as theirs, of weaving him into the fabric of their family. The weeks that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Henry proved to be a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches, but the demands of caring for an infant left Sarah perpetually tired. Harrison took over many of the household chores, cooking meals and hauling water and doing laundry without complaint. And at night, he would walk with Henry when the baby fussed, singing old songs in his rough voice until Henry settled. Spring arrived gradually, snow melting to reveal the greening earth, and as the world came back to life, Sarah felt herself blooming as well. Her body healed, her strength returned, and the fears and shame that had haunted her for so long faded into distant memory. She was happy in a way she had not known was possible, grateful every day for the twist of fate that had brought her to South Pass City and into Harrison's life. When Henry was 3 months old, Sarah and Harrison took him to town for his baptism, standing proudly before the congregation as Reverend Thompson blessed their son and welcomed him into the community. Sarah saw some calculating glances, some people noting that Henry was large for a 3-month-old baby, but she held her head high and kept her hand in Harrison's, secure in the knowledge that they had broken no laws and held no shame. After the baptism, as people gathered outside the church to coo over Henry and offer their congratulations, Ruth pulled Sarah aside with a knowing smile. "People will always talk, but what matters is the truth you know in your heart. That baby is blessed to have parents who love him so fiercely, and anyone with eyes can see Harrison Fletcher is his father in every way that counts." "Thank you," Sarah said, embracing her friend, "for everything, for believing in me when I had given up on myself. You did the hard part, child. You kept going when it would have been easier to give up, and look what you have now." Ruth gestured toward Harrison, who was showing Henry off to a group of admiring women with obvious pride. A good man, a healthy baby, and a future brighter than anything you could have imagined back when you stepped off that stage. It was true. Sarah's life had become something she could not have dreamed during those dark days of fear and flight. She had a husband who loved her genuinely and completely, a son who was the joy of her days, and a community that had accepted her despite the circumstances of her arrival. She had found redemption and grace in this wild, harsh land, and she would spend the rest of her life being grateful for it. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys in the measure of any life. Harrison and Sarah saved carefully, eventually buying a small parcel of land where they built a larger house and started running their own small herd of cattle. The work was hard, the profits slim at first, but they faced every obstacle together, their partnership growing stronger with each season. Henry grew into a bright, sturdy boy, with his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind. When he was 3 years old, Sarah found herself pregnant again, this time without fear or shame, only joy at the thought of expanding their family. She gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Grace, and Henry proved to be a devoted big brother, always watching over the babies with protective care. The growing family necessitated additions to the house, and Harrison spent his evenings building new rooms. expanding their home to accommodate their expanding hearts. Sarah started her small school, as she had dreamed, teaching not only her own children, but several others from neighboring ranches, finding fulfillment in watching young minds grow and develop. When Henry was 7 years old, curious about the world as all children are, he asked Sarah one evening where he had been born and how old she and Harrison had been when they married. Sarah felt her heart clench with old fear, but when she looked at Harrison for guidance, his steady gaze gave her courage. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said, gathering Henry onto her lap, "about how your father and I came to be married and about how very wanted you are." She told him the truth in age-appropriate terms, about how she had made a mistake with someone who did not truly love her, about how she had come west frightened and alone, about how Harrison had chosen to marry her and claim Henry as his own, despite knowing the circumstances. She watched Henry's face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction, afraid he would feel betrayed or less loved. But Henry simply looked at Harrison, his young face serious, and asked, "So, you're not my real father?" "I am your real father," Harrison said firmly, pulling Henry from Sarah's lap to his own. "The man who gave you life was a coward who ran away. I'm the one who has loved you since before you were born, who walked the floor with you when you cried, who taught you to ride and will teach you everything else you need to know. Blood doesn't make a father, Henry. Love and choice and commitment do, and I chose you. I'll always choose you." Henry thought about this for a moment, then wrapped his arms around Harrison's neck. "Then you're my real father, and I'm glad, because you're the best father anyone could have." Sarah saw tears gleam in Harrison's eyes, watched him hold their son close, and felt her own eyes fill. This was the final healing, the last piece falling into place. The secret she had carried so long had been spoken aloud, and instead of destroying their family, it had only revealed the depths of the love that bound them. Over the years, the story became part of their family history, told without shame as an example of how grace and second chances could transform lives. Sarah never hid her past from her children, but neither did she let it define their present. She was simply their mother, Harrison was their father, and they were a family built on choice and love rather than accident or obligation. The town of South Pass City continued its slow decline as mining played out and people moved on to greener prospects. But the Fletcher family stayed, putting down roots too deep to be easily torn up. They became pillars of the community, Harrison respected for his honesty and hard work, Sarah valued for her teaching and her quiet strength. The whispers about their hasty marriage faded into old history, replaced by admiration for the solid partnership they had built. Henry grew into a fine young man, eventually marrying a girl from a neighboring ranch and starting his own family. Samuel and Grace followed their own paths, Samuel taking to ranching like his father, Grace showing an academic brilliance that eventually took her to Teachers College in Cheyenne. 2 more children came to Sarah and Harrison over the years, rounding out their family at 6 children total, each one loved and wanted and raised with the same fierce devotion. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Sarah back to the spot where they had first met, behind the depot where she had been sick and scared and alone. The building still stood, though the depot had long since closed, the railroad having bypassed South Pass City for more profitable routes. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked, holding Harrison's hand as they stood in the afternoon sunshine. "Taking on so much when you could have had an easier life with someone else?" "Never," Harrison said without hesitation. "You gave me everything that matters, a family, a purpose, a reason to build something lasting. I was half alive before you came, and you made me whole." "You did the same for me," Sarah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You saw me when I thought I was invisible, valued me when I thought I was worthless. You gave me back my life." "We gave each other everything," Harrison corrected, pulling her close. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Every struggle, every challenge, every moment of doubt, because it led us here, to this life, these children, this love." They stood together watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ruins of what might have been a tragedy. Sarah thought about the frightened girl who had stepped off the stage 20 years ago, pregnant and unwed, and convinced her life was over, and marveled at the transformation. That girl had become this woman, strong and confident and surrounded by love, and the journey between the two had been made possible by a cowboy who understood that people were wanted, not needed, chosen because of their worth rather than taken on as an obligation. As they walked back toward their ranch, toward the home they had built, and the children who were surely causing chaos in their absence, Sarah felt profound gratitude for every choice that had led her to this moment. She had come west running from shame and found redemption. She had arrived alone and found family. She had thought herself ruined and discovered instead that she was resilient beyond measure, capable of more than she had imagined, worthy of the love she had stopped believing she deserved. Harrison's hand was warm and calloused in hers, familiar after 20 years, and Sarah squeezed his fingers gently. He looked down at her with the same creek-water eyes that had first offered her kindness, the same steady presence that had anchored her through every storm, and smiled with a tenderness that still made her heart skip. "I love you," Sarah said, simple words that carried the weight of decades. "I love you too," Harrison replied, then, now, and always. They walked on together through the Wyoming landscape they both loved, through the wild country that had tested them and shaped them and ultimately embraced them, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The past no longer haunted her, the future held no fear, and the present was rich with the kind of happiness that only comes from genuine love, freely given and gratefully received. Years continued to pass in the way they do, bringing the inevitable changes of life. Children grew up and moved away, then came back for visits bringing grandchildren who filled the ranch house with laughter and chaos. Sarah's hair turned gray, Harrison's shoulders grew more stooped, but the love between them never wavered or faded. If anything, it deepened with time, weathering every season like the mountains weathered storms, unchanging in its essence even as surface details shifted. When Henry brought his own son to meet them, a boy with bright eyes and a curious nature, Sarah held her grandson and thought about the circle of life, about how fear and shame had transformed into hope and joy across 2 generations. She told young Harrison the story of his grandfather's courage and kindness, wanting him to understand that families were built on more than blood, that love was always a choice, and that choosing to love was the bravest and best thing a person could do. Harrison Fletcher proved this truth every day of his life, from the moment he had offered marriage to a desperate stranger until his final breath decades later. He loved without counting the cost, gave without expecting return, and built a legacy measured not in land or wealth, but in the hearts of the family he had chosen, and who had chosen him in return. And Sarah, who had arrived in South Pass City broken and afraid, spent her life being grateful for the grace that had met her in the form of a cowboy who understood that she was wanted, not needed, valued for herself rather than for what she could provide. She had been running when she stepped off that stage, but she had found in the wild Wyoming wilderness the only place she ever needed to be, the only person she ever needed to be with, and the only life she could ever have wanted. Their story became legend in the small community, passed down through generations as an example of how love could redeem the most hopeless situations, how kindness could change lives, and how 2 people who should never have found each other could build something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch still stood, worked now by their great-grandchildren, and the lessons Harrison and Sarah had taught through their lives and their love continued to echo through the years. In the end, Sarah Fletcher died peacefully at 83, surrounded by the family that had grown from that single leap of faith she had taken in accepting Harrison's proposal. Her last words were to her husband of 61 years, holding his hand as she had on their wedding day, thanking him one final time for choosing her, for loving her, for giving her the life she had never dared dream was possible. Harrison followed her 6 months later, as though he could not bear to be parted from her for longer, and they were buried side by side in the small cemetery overlooking the valley they had both loved. Their headstone was simple, marked with their names and dates and a single phrase that told their entire story in 4 words that Harrison had spoken so long ago when Sarah had confessed her shameful secret and he had offered her salvation. "You're wanted, not needed," the stone read, and everyone who knew their story understood the profound truth contained in those words, the grace they represented, and the love they embodied. It was a truth that had transformed 2 lives and created a legacy that would continue for generations, a reminder that the greatest love stories are not about perfect people finding each other, but about flawed human beings choosing to love anyway, building something beautiful from broken pieces, and proving that redemption is always possible for those brave enough to reach for it and generous enough to offer it. The wild Wyoming wind blew across their graves as it had blown across their lives, carrying with it the scent of sage and pine, the promise of seasons changing and life continuing, and the eternal truth that love freely given and gratefully received is the only thing that truly lasts when everything else has faded into memory and dust.